Nice. Well, great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Arvid Rosengren, one of my favorite people in the wine scene in New York City, working at Legacy Records, the wine director, head sommelier there, and still working, thankfully, even though Legacy is closed. We know that obviously a lot of people in the hospitality industry are hurting real bad. And how are things going for you and the team at Legacy?
Yeah, so we're like most people in our industry, and certainly in New York and most people around the world. The restaurant industry is shut down, and Legacy is much the same. We've been closed for a couple of weeks, and trying to figure out what the future in this sort of even in the post coronavirus world means. Who knows? It's certainly very uncertain times for our industry. So, at this point, I'm staying busy as much as I can, and trying to work on different projects and making sure the restaurant's still standing, and trying to check in on the wine cellar and so, things like that.
Make sure the storage hasn't been compromised, that to the tune of
exactly.
1 bottle a day or something.
Do some quality control, that kind of thing. No, it's tough times, and we'll see what comes out of it. Hopefully, when this is all over, there'll be an appetite for going out and eating and drinking and being together with people more than anything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I miss you and Legacy and the whole team there. One of my favorite places in New York City, and I'm sure things will get back to normal, even though it might not. Even when it does get back to normal, I mean, like right now, I know a lot of my friends in Hong Kong, they're starting to go out to the restaurants, but they have the mandates where it's half occupancy, or it's everybody needs to kind of keep their distance, and kind of these kind of things might be kind of a gradual turnover. But I guess the summer is as good a time as any is to kind of get back in the swing, because it's generally a slower time, in the city in general. So that might not be as bad a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you were the world's best sommelier in 2016. That's quite an accomplishment. Tell us a little bit about that journey and what you had to do to get there, and whether you were, literally like underground for a year or more. And, that's quite an accomplishment. Congratulations for that. And tell us about that journey.
Yeah, so it's a weird one, and I should say first of all that it's when I was sort of studying wine initially, and when I got my first sort of gigs in the wine world, I certainly didn't dream of ever calling myself the world's best. Like, that's not me. People who know me would probably attest to that, and it's not something that I strive for in itself. It's something that kind of came of happenstance. I was working in a restaurant where me and another co-worker were sort of sharing the role of the head sommelier job. And he had enrolled in the best sommelier of Sweden, which is where I'm from, and I was working in Stockholm at the time. And I thought, I have no real interest in this, but at least I can beat this guy. So it was like a friendly, I was helping him train, and while doing that, I figured out I think I can do this as well as he can. And so it was kind of a friendly rivalry, and so I did that, and I didn't win the first time, but I did well enough that I was hooked to keep going. And the following year in 2009, or maybe 10, I won the best sommelier of Sweden and Nordic countries, and then that sort of set me down the path of that. And it's a weird, like I said, it's a very niche competition, right? What we're training on is basically the same things that you'd see in, if you've seen the Somm documentary, or if you've followed any of that sort of curriculum. It's the same sort of things. It's theoretical knowledge, which is a giant part of it. You're tested on the most obscure esoteric wine knowledge you can find, right? From, anything from, Hungarian synonyms for grapes to Chinese wine regions, it goes to such a insane depth. And there's a ton of blind tasting, both wines, but also spirits and beers and sake and, whatever else there is. And then service skills. So you're put into situations where you're sort of emulating a restaurant with all the little tricky scenarios that can arise in service. And yeah, I was on that path for about 7 or 8 years, which is a very short time in a way. Most of the people who sort of my immediate predecessor, best sommeliers of the world, both won in their 50s. So I was young for having sort of blasted through it in a way, but it took really intense. Like I was, like you said, I was kind of locked away for years.
Well, 7 or 8 years. I mean, that's like basically getting a PhD, in being in the wine service. And so like the final competition, they had like an audience and a live situation for the final exam, and I hear they brought in like somebody to act like a real jerk and see who didn't crack under pressure, and that's what put you over the top for the first place prize.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there's a lot of like fake restaurant scenarios that are put through, but it gets, the further you get in the competition. When I competed in Argentina, Mendoza, which is where I won the title. The world competition is held every 3 years, and to get there, you have to be the best of your respective country. So I represented Sweden as such, and I had about 60 people competing against me, and yeah, the further you get, the more weeded down it gets. So you go from 60 to about 15 to 3 in the final, and then you're on stage. There was about 500 people watching with live streaming going out to the world. If you really are interested, if you need help falling asleep tonight, you can go to YouTube and just Google or search my name. You'll find like the 1 hour long final scenario there somewhere.
Oh, that's very cool.
Not that exciting as a spectator sport, but trust me, it's nerve wracking once you're in it.
Well, we're all wine and food people here, so it's actually probably more exciting to us than you might think. And congratulations again on that spectacular accomplishment. And so talk to us a little bit. So you're from Sweden. I mean, you sound like an American, not to insult you or anything, but, it's, you don't really have, an accent to speak perfect English. What was it like growing up in Sweden? I think Sweden, Scandinavia in general, to me, is one of the best food places and food cultures right now in the world. For those of you that haven't been able to go to Copenhagen, Stockholm, Oslo, and do the whole kind of tour of the Scandinavian fine cuisine, it is amazing. One of the real, for me, hotbeds of, just food ingenuity and just new things going on and fresh, and the ingredients and everything. I'm a huge fan. And so were you out, when you were growing up, were you like foraging for lingonberries and, walking to school 7 hours in the snow, or what was it like for you?
Yeah, I mean, they're I guess some of that's true. Like, I would say that the town that I grew up in, and I grew up a bit because of around a little bit south of Sweden, but the town that I mainly grew up in was kind of like a post-industrial working class city, sort of like like a comparable to Detroit of Sweden, a place that's been really dominated by one industry for a very long time.
What is the Detroit of Sweden?
It's called Malmö.
Malmö, okay.
Right across the bridge from Copenhagen.
Okay.
So it's close to Denmark in that sense. And so there, while I did certainly at times forage for lingonberries and go mushroom picking and blueberries and that sort of thing, my sort of upbringing was much more fish sticks and frozen peas and powdered potato, it was called mashed potatoes, than it was fine dining. But I was always into food and I liked cooking when I grew up, and I had some sort of romanticized dream of one day becoming a chef. And from the age of 15 on, I sort of worked in kitchens, everything from McDonald's to little bistro restaurants in my hometown. And sort of throughout my high school and college years, I always had little extra gigs of doing that sort of thing. And, but wine was certainly not a big part of it. My mother works in rehabilitation of addicts, so she was pretty much a naysayer when it came to alcohol. Occasionally she likes Campari. I'll say that she likes like bitter drinks, and if there was wine at home, it was very simple stuff. It was Co-op Navarro or Rioja or Cote d'Aron or that sort of thing. So I definitely tasted wine at a young age and definitely liked the taste and aromas of it, but it wasn't, I didn't get it wasn't the kind of upbringing where we had, Latour at the dinner table or that sort of thing you sometimes hear from like European wine professionals. That's definitely not part of my upbringing. That came much later. So when I sort of went to university, and I went down a completely different route initially. I was kind of book smart and good at math and study. I went into an engineering field. But at university, I had a group of friends who really enjoyed drinking and cooking. So we threw big dinner parties. We took any excuse we could to throw a dinner party for ourselves and our friends, and pulled money together and bought, at that time, probably more beer and whiskey, but at least like good stuff. And eventually a friend of mine at university got me a gig in a wine shop. And it was supposed to just be over summer while we were on like summer hiatus. And I kind of got stuck there. I spent that summer and then stayed on for another year and a half or so. And I really realized kind of early on that, people came into the wine shop and they'd ask you questions like, all right, so what should I drink with this thing that I'm cooking? Or like, what does this mean on a label? And I realized I had to study to figure out wine. And also that so it kind of it satisfied that like nerdy part of me. And then there were a couple of epiphany wines, which were, in hindsight, really simple wines, but it was like good Langhe Nebbiolo from like Produttore del Barbaresco and that sort of thing, where it opened my eyes to, I don't know, I was just like dumbfounded, like how can you get that much, like how can one glass smell of so many different things? I try to I don't know, it got the wheels moving in my head of like trying to figure out why is wine the way it is, right? And why is this wine different from that wine? And it really got me started down that path. And I realized that also that I could make a career of it. And that if I kept going down my academic field of sort of nanotech engineering, that as interesting as it was and probably more lucrative or whatever, that I would be stuck in a lab coat or behind a computer running simulations for the rest of my days, and I wouldn't have as much fun or have girlfriends or whatnot. So so I dove headlong into wine, and I finally went back to the restaurants too.
I think you would look good in a lab coat, though. I think you.
Maybe. There have been times where I missed, and certainly like that initial couple of years of studying science has probably given me a better understanding of wine too. I have a much easier time of conversing with winemakers now when they talk about, the chemical aspect or the biology of wine, right?
Yeah. Well, it's it's also interesting that, and you came. What made you come to America for the first time?
So let me just boost the volume a bit. I had been I worked in Stockholm for a few years, and then I moved to Copenhagen, Denmark, which at the time was just such a great restaurant scene and much better in wine. I think now they're pretty even, but it was such a great wine scene. So I moved to Copenhagen. I lived there for a few years, and I kind of quickly sort of worked my way up from a floor somm of this restaurant. This restaurant group I was at expanded really rapidly and opened, they went from 1 restaurant to 3 restaurants to when I left, they were at 8 restaurants and we're opening 4 more the next year. So I became the sort of the corporate wine director for that group. And as great as that was, I had for a restaurant buyer tremendous buying power, and it allowed me a bunch of travel and meeting winemakers and like really getting into that. I was also becoming kind of desk bound and spending more time in front of spreadsheets than I was with people in the restaurants and with the bottles and I wasn't doing the job of a sommelier anymore. So I was kind of getting tired of the gig that I had, and kind of by happenstance, I didn't really have much of I never dreamt of going to New York in that sense, but I happened to stumble upon, which ties nicely into the first wine that we're tasting. I knew this guy, Jean-Marc Rouleau. I'd been buying his wines for a few years, and we'd become friendly. And he was visiting Scandinavia along with a couple of other French winemakers, and I spent a bunch of time with them in Denmark, and then we went up to Stockholm to spend, I think, 3 or 4 days in the company of another good friend of ours, Rajat Par, who I'd known for a few years, and who knows everyone in the wine world, obviously. So in Stockholm, we met up with a couple of guys, one of which was Piero Incisa, who happens to be the producer of the first wine that we're tasting, along with Jean-Marc. And also Robert Bohr, who I think a lot of people who are watching will know as one of the sort of great American sommeliers and restaurateurs and wine importers. Now he runs Grand Cru Selections, which imports some of these wines that we're tasting today. And we just really, we spent 4 days with a lot of eating and drinking. We, in and around Stockholm and up to this restaurant called Faviken, which is closed now. It was pretty famous at the time. A tiny little restaurant that we made a little pilgrimage to. And we just really hit it off. And like I said, I was kind of leaving my job at the time, but it was like the kind of job you have to go in exile to leave, if that makes sense. Like, it was great on paper, and I didn't want to step down from that, but I really was missing just working in a restaurant, working with people, selling wine, opening bottles, talking to people and having fun. And Robert at the time owned and ran a restaurant called Charlie Bird in New York City, which I hadn't visited. I hadn't even been there at the time. It just sounded like so much fun. So I basically quit my job. After this trip, I came back to Copenhagen, quit my job, and traveled to New York. Spent a weekend here with Robert and the Charlie Bird guys and a couple of other just the way things come together. A bunch of people from Burgundy who happened to be here at the time, and then I came back and worked Palais, which that Palais was my first week of actual working in New York, and you know how crazy that is.
That's an instant addiction right there.
Yeah, and I remember at the end of that week, I was like, this is so much fun. I've opened more amazing wine than I've ever had, ever. And I don't know if I can keep up at this pace. Right. And thankfully, it kind of calmed down a bit after that. But yeah, that's the story of how I ended up here.
Right. Well, we're glad to have you here in New York City, and we're glad to have you make a few great selections for us. We got 4 New World wines. You said you hate that term New World because everybody thinks, if you say New World, it means
yeah, I just
big alcoholic oaky wine.
Exactly.
Like
yeah,
that,
it has connotations that doesn't really make sense anymore. And I think that's, I think both, the wines that I put on my wine list tend to be more old world, more European. The same is true for for you, right? And the wines that you tend to drink are more classic European. The same is true for Grand Cru Selections, who imports these wines. They have a great portfolio of Burgundy and Italy, and that's what they're famous for. But, with the level, there have always been great New World wines. I shouldn't say that. But I think now, more than ever, the lines are so blurred, right? There's so much great stuff coming out of California and Australia and South America that, the term is almost meaningless at this point. So, yeah, I figured we'd taste some New World wine today, knowing that these wines in a blind tasting with classic European wines would probably, at the very least hold their own and probably be confused for old wines much of the time.
Yeah, this is pretty impressive. It's a Patagonia Chardonnay, and Patagonia, I thought that was in Chile, but I guess it's in Argentina as well. Apparently, learning something myself. I tend to drink north of my residency in general, but I mean, it's a pretty impressive duo. I mean, obviously Piero from the Sassicaia family, in Italy, and Jean-Marc Clos. I mean, that's a pretty high-powered duo, and this wine is like, $45 a bottle. To have those two, people and families involved in a project. I mean, at that price, it's pretty spectacular, and the wine is amazing. I mean, I've been working on this since, obviously, I've been working on this since about 5 o'clock or 4:30 actually, to prep for our 5 o'clock session, and it's going down very easily. It's just a really delicious expression Chardonnay, not heavy-handed, just kind of has style, has refinement, has elegance, and it has character as well. I mean, it's only, how many years have they been doing this?
So Piero started Chakra in I think 03 or 04. So he's been at it for a while, but the focus was Pinot for the longest time. And Pinot and Chardonnay, I guess, go hand in hand, but Piero's passion was Pinot. They're obviously good friends, and I suspect that Piero convinced Jean-Marc to have sort of a holiday destination to go, try out some his hand at making wine in the New World. Patagonia is far away from just about everything. Even within Argentina,
it's pretty much a mountainous region, right? How many
Yeah.
hours from the airport? Where do you fly into? Buenos Aires, or do you fly into Santiago, actually?
You can fly into both, but I think, from there you got to take a connecting flight to Neuquén. So you got another hour or two. John, I got a technical glitch. I'm going to plug in my computer. It'll take 30 seconds. Sorry.
Okay, well, I'll handle it.
Can you call out the alcohol on this wine just for people to know?
Yeah, alcohol. It's, yes, 12.5 only.
So really in line with Burgundy on that, which was, I think, a really interesting point of this wine.
Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful wine. We have a note here from Drew, but you're asking about Arvid's favorite regions or grapes, because Arvid's the sommelier here, not me. Although I could talk about myself as well, but I'm a little confused. Maybe because he's J.K. Capon, right? Arvid's
exactly the other Capon,
right.
Capon.
You're confusing me.
Yeah.
JK
thing. In terms of New World regions or everywhere.
A few of your favorite regions or grapes, or
So
background.
what I first fell in love with in the world of wine was Piedmont and Mosel Riesling. Those were my two first mind-blowing type of wines, right? Both regions that I still love dearly. I think then came Burgundy and the Loire Valley, and the Rhone Valley, and the more when I started selling real wine and making some money, came Bordeaux and Champagne as well. Nowadays, Burgundy, I guess, has outshone everything in terms of price. But at the time, you could still drink really, really, really well in places like Barolo and Burgundy and the Rhone Valley. And this is not that long ago, but even 10 years ago. Northern Rhone more than Southern for me. We'll get to that later. And it then, I mean, I spent a lot of my time, especially when I worked in Copenhagen, exploring American wine. Strangely enough, I was a huge buyer of American wine. You know, it's funny. People always, when people from Europe come to visit me here, they always, you know, want to drink American wine. And I'm like, I have to tell them, for the most part, like, New York is a very Europhile city. Like, most of the wine.
You have to go to the steakhouses if you want American wine.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So I definitely bought more American wine while I was in Europe, but that certainly like gave me a really, and I've traveled over to California twice a year and Oregon or Washington once a year. I think in terms of, if we want to separate it into New World, I think there are so many interesting places. You know, I think some parts of California, especially like Santa Barbara right now, are amazing, not just value, but like truthfully great wine, like that will stand the test of time. I think places like, you know, some parts of Oregon will be, you know, they're still like fulfilling their potential, but the wines are amazing.
That's
Southern.
what your second selection is, right? Oregon.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
Harper, Voigt, Willamette Valley. I mean, I drink a lot of Pinot, domestic Pinot at home myself, and this is quite delicious. This is another nice selection. Tell us a little bit about this Harper Voigt from the Willamette Valley.
Yeah, so this is a tiny little operation run by a guy called Drew Voigt, who has worked for some of the like big names in California, Domaine Serene, Shea Wine Cellars, probably a couple of others. And really, you know, Oregon is kind of big and diverse and sort of hard to summarize in a couple of sentences. It's not geologically like easy to define. There's some volcanic soils and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. But Drew really got an education in finding the best vineyards, or some of the great vineyard sites of that place. And he makes some outstanding Pinot and also some really, really great white wine that you should not miss. He makes a couple of Pinot Blancs that are like world class for a grape that, you know, you could eat
like $20 a bottle or something.
Yeah, exactly. That you could easily you know, Pinot Blanc you could easily forget about, but his Pinot Blancs are outstanding. This one right here, the Strand line, is this Willamette Valley appellation. So Drew works mostly in the southern, southwestern part of Willamette. A lot of Willamette Hills sourcing, but this is a blend of a couple of different vineyards, and this has some power to it. You know, this vintage is we're tasting 16, is pretty powerful, but it still has like a streak of
pushing the alcohol levels, but not over the top, but a little bit of that.
No, I'm drinking mine pretty chilled, maybe a little too cold at this point, but it's really, I think, delicious, and I think it shows some of the strengths of Oregon. And you know, one trap that I think we tend to fall into when we talk about things like Oregon Pinot or California Chardonnay or whatever it is that we tend to make it into, you know, either it's like too big or it's Burgundian, like it's a copy of Burgundy.
Right.
Which we've already got Burgundy. We don't necessarily need, you know, a copy of that. Burgundy, like Oregon, has to stand on its own legs and sort of make a name for itself. That said, like Burgundy's a great place to be. I think this has some of the qualities of great Burgundy, you know, maybe more in the like think like Gevrey Chambertin 2015 type vibes. This is a structured adult type wine. You know, it's not like, even though it's juicy and like, yeah, you can just put this away for, yeah, exactly. You know, put this away for a couple of years. I'm like, this will show great. I'm pretty convinced that the fruit is super pure and like jumping out of the glass. It's a little darker.
Very dark. It's got a lot of, you know, you don't generally get this kind of darkness or depth in a Cali Pinot Noirs, which tend to be a little juicier and a little fruitier and not
Yeah.
quite get more of this kind of like that kind of foresty, black forest kind of
Yeah.
complexity here. I mean, this is a nice wine. And Lily, how much does this wine sell for? How much do we sell this wine for?
The Harper Voigt, we sell for $46.99.
Right in that sweet spot, $40, $50.
Yeah.
Yeah, another nice wine. And now we're going to move on to something I don't think I've ever had before. I haven't had a California Tempranillo. I do drink a lot of Tempranillo. I drink a lot of Lopez and other Riojas. I'm a big Rioja fan. I think Rioja is one of the great values, you know, in wine today, in fine wine today. And this is a Enfield Wine Company. It's a Tempranillo, another lower alcohol wine, which we like. A little bit of Graciano and Pinot Noir blended in there. That's unusual.
Yeah, it's really unusual.
Produced. So this is like a tiny micro production, right?
Yeah. So I think Enfield is a producer that I've sort of kept my eye on for a few years, and I will admit that I've truthfully worked more with his Chardonnay and Pinot and Syrah and Cab than his Tempranillo, but I just thought this was such a cool, unique wine. And so this Enfield is this project. It's a winery or wine brand by this guy John Lockwood, who he would blush and like go hide somewhere, but I really think he's one of the real like winemaking talents out of California right now. And you know, I've felt this way from the start. Some of the wines that he's been putting out on the market is just incredibly, I don't know if elegant's always the right word to use, but very subtle, very sort of true to its place and its origins. And like part of the story here is that like John didn't, you know, I'm putting words into his mouth. I don't know if he's here to defend himself, but I'm pretty confident in saying that he didn't go out looking for Tempranillo. Like he didn't have a dream of making the great Californian Rioja. He was probably, you know, offered to go look at a vineyard and you know, when seeing it, said, this looks really great. What's planted here? And, you know, when they told him Tempranillo, he was probably like, all right, whatever, I'll try it. And it happened to turn out pretty well. But he's the kind of guy that follows in the footsteps of someone like Tegan Passalacqua from like Turley and Sandlands fame. And like the vineyard is pretty all important, right? So John is looking for great terroir, and whatever lens that's sort of translated through, in this case it's Tempranillo and a couple of other grapes, that's what he's got to work with. And I think the result is pretty awesome. So that's that.
Yeah, beautiful wine, and really nice. Nice, like you said, it is elegant. It is kind of, and I think all these wines, the first three wines so far, I mean, they all have the kind of the single thread between them all is this kind of drinkability, this deliciousness. I mean, none of these wines are wines I think I would say, oh yeah, put it down for 5 or 10 years and like let it get there. They're all there right now, and I think that's like one of the great things about New World wines when they're done by people like these that you're sharing with us, and some of these kind of inside picks that you've kind of turned us on to. Like all these wines are the kind of wines that I would like to drink at home, you know, on a nightly basis, just like delicious, tasty wines. And of course, they're all from Grand Cru Selections, great importer in New York City and beyond. And, you know, our mutual friend, Robert Bohr, you know, who's one of the great palates and really grew up in the restaurant scene, now is in the import business, has, you know, kind of discovered these wines, is discovering other wines, and is a real kind of boutique, small house. And, you know, all these wines are exciting to me, especially when you consider the price point. You know, it's exciting to get like delicious.
Yeah, I think in one way where, you know, I always like think about this when I especially when I read like wine sort of biographies and such. You read the great like British wine authors. You read how they grew up in like the 60s and 70s, drinking Latour for a day's worth of work, and I can be envious of that. But at the same time, I think the quality in general around the world has never been higher. There's great wine coming out of just about anywhere. So we're lucky in that way. And yeah, I would agree. I think all of these wines are ready to drink. Although I think we'll be surprised if you manage to buy some of these and put them away. You probably will be happy if you rediscover it in 5 years or even 10 in some cases. I think they have what it takes to age. But yeah, they're delicious right now.
We have a couple of questions.
I'm like chugging this Tempranillo.
We have a couple of questions from the group, and one is what you think of the Finger Lakes, and another is talking about some of the old world characteristics of these wines. Hearing forest, what are some of the other flavors and adjectives you might get out of some of these three wines? And we'd love to. We're gonna, after we taste the last wine, we'll open it up to everybody to ask some questions live.
Mm-hmm.
Any color, if you want, let us know, and we'll do that as well.
Let me answer the Finger Lakes question first. I think, first off, I should say that I've been in New York City now for 5 years, and a little more than that. And one of my great embarrassments is that I haven't been to the Finger Lakes yet. It's such a trek.
I'm not going to say I haven't been to the Finger Lakes after that introduction. Nice.
No, it's kind of embarrassing. Like, it's right there, almost.
I guess I won't recommend you for that next year's Wines of New York campaign as a person, perhaps.
Well, maybe now's the time to go. There's no traffic, and New York City's never been better in that sense.
Pretty damn quickly now, I think.
Yeah. Well, I would say that I think the Finger Lakes is producing some awesome stuff. If we just start with the Rieslings, I think that I've had some truly amazing wines, both young and with age, coming out of there. So I think that track record is just about proven. And then there's other cool wine, like out of the lineup that we have right now, we could have had wine from my good friend Thomas, who's making the Terrassen wines, coming out of with grapes like Cabernet Franc and Gamay. That doesn't maybe fit the mold of what Finger Lakes brand now is, which is pretty much his Riesling, but I think there's some great potential there. Absolutely. It's a cool place.
I think it's the only place you can get a good Cheval Blanc these days too. Right? That's a good one.
Just what we need.
In the Sommelier competition, right?
Yeah.
Cheval Blanc. So what about some of these old world characteristics? I mean, it's really just characteristics in general. Forest. What are some of the flavors you're getting out of these wines? The first three wines.
Just to we can go through them. I'm not a giant fan of like rattling off tasting notes, especially. I think that's so subjective. But like structurally, I think that all of these wines have a structure that has some like tension and resistance, right? Which is something that I tend to associate with the old world. And now we're generalizing. It's not true for all the old world by any means, but if we talk about the great wines of Europe, of the old world, they all have tension. And in some cases, to a degree where you need to age them for a long time. If we're talking about Bordeaux or Barolos, that kind of thing, or even like, Austrian Riesling, that kind of thing. They're not always pleasurable wines when they're like straight out of the tank. They need a little bit of coaxing into something that's delicious. These wines were all delicious, but they do have some of that structure, like tasting the Chardonnay. This is less reductive than the last vintage was. I know that, but it has the characteristic that I also find in like great white Burgundy that is like destined for aging. It has the acidic backbone. It has like the smokiness and the reduction. It has like the dry extract and like almost a little bit of a tannic grip to it that to me is an old world characteristic. If we're like, Argentina is probably one of the places with the most like competent winemaking out there in the world, for good and bad. It usually means that their wines are like too polished and too pretty and too perfect. you know, and that to me is like a new world way of making wine, if that makes sense. Like, and this wine doesn't
Right.
quite
Well,
follow that mold.
more man than earth, right? I mean, like the great
Yeah. So even if they're,
tell you, like we're just the shepherd and the earth makes the wine and we're like the shepherd and we don't make the wine.
right.
But then I
I mean, it's
see more of
obviously
that
made
new
by
world
talented
where,
people.
right, the
Yeah.
egos and stuff get kind of like, oh, it's me, look at my wine, my wine. And that's, I think, some of the misnomer behind like new world wine is those personalities and characteristics that have kind of like made it more about them than the actual wine. But these are not those kind of wines.
Exactly. I think that's especially true looking at, I mean, it's true for all the wines really, but especially like, you know, for the Chardonnay, for Chakra, they don't have that much to compare it to. Like I can list like the great Chardonnays of Argentina on like 3 fingers. But when it comes to the Harper Voigt in the Enfield, or Harper Voigt especially, like they're competing with some Oregon wines, some Oregon Pinots that are pretty fancy and pretty expensive, right? But they've chosen to make wine in a different way, and wines that may not be as like immediately impressive and like overpoweringly so. And that's a philosophical choice of letting these vineyards speak for themselves through the wine. And I tend to admire that, and I tend to think that the result is also, at least to my palate, more delicious. And maybe it's, you know, for the Enfield, for the Tempranillo, you know, there's not that many great Tempranillos to compare this to, but if you take the cab that this guy's making and put that up against, you know, the other great Cabernets of Sonoma and Napa, it's a very different style. It's a hugely different style. And I think that is because he isn't worried about polishing. And like you say, the ego factor of it. He's not looking for a rating on this. It's made in tiny amounts and yeah, it's a different way of making wine. That's it.
Well, speaking of delicious New World wines, I'm very happy that you brought with you a wine that I tasted recently this year, the first time in London. I was actually in London trying this Australian Grenache made by the husband and wife tandem, the Betts family, who are great, who have a history of being great sommeliers and have started to make their own wines. And how do you pronounce this? I don't want to pronounce it wrong because it could be embarrassing.
I would say Suzette.
Suzette, okay, that's
like
better.
Like a crepe Suzette.
Right, okay, Suzette. Yeah. And they only make like a few hundred cases of this wine. And this is like a delicious one. I mean, honestly, it reminds me a little bit of Chateau Rice. It's like a little baby Rice that's like super Grenache, super delicious. Like it doesn't have like the stuffing of a Rice or that kind of like, oh, I want to age this for a long time, but it is tasty.
Yeah, I think someone asked earlier if I liked when I fell in love with wine, if I liked Northern or Southern Rhone, and Southern Rhone was just like when you start in wine, and I think a lot of us have this. You figure out what you like and what you don't like a little bit too quickly. So, and I hear this a lot from people. They say like, oh, I don't like Sauvignon Blanc, or I don't like South African wine, or I don't like, Italian wine gives me a headache. And I certainly early on convinced myself that I did not like Grenache. It was just like, I didn't get it. I just didn't like it. It was too often like oxidative and too high in alcohol and too sweet and too sugary. Because what I was drinking or what I was tasting was mostly Southern Rhone, Chateauneuf, or some of the neighboring places, made in that style, which was really popular in those years.
Chateauneuf's like the whole region just got hijacked for a little bit there.
So in a way, so I've had to like backtrack a little bit when it comes to Grenache, because when I really realized what a great variety it could be was when I tasted Spanish Grenache and Australian Grenache and to some degrees, like some of the iconic, like sine qua nons and that kind of thing. But what tended to bother me, you know, so those wines are just so beautifully aromatic, like fresh and kind of transparent and red fruited and herbal and just like so exuberantly aromatic, you know, in a way that almost like surpasses Pinot. But in the case of what I was tasting out of California and Australia, they always had like a little alcoholic burn to it too, which I didn't enjoy. And it was, you know, it took me a few years to get to the Rayas stage of tasting wine. And that's when I like, oh, that's when it clicked, right? Because that had the best of both worlds. It had the balance of the French sort of style, but the aromatics that we'd see in places like, now we see a ton in sort of central Spain, beautiful garnachas. And we see it out of, you know, but, you know, a wine like this out of Barossa Valley in Australia, not a place that's famous for this kind of wine, right? It tends to be really powerful, you know, dark and deep to the point where they're like black wines. You know, that this is just so different.
You know, there's a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope with Australia. You know, I remember when like Australia first got like kind of put on the map, and like, you know, Parker came out. He came out like, I mean, it must have been the late 90s or something. And literally all the wines like tripled overnight in price. It became this whole thing, you know, where it just became this craze. And then a lot of the wines that he like really liked, people decided they didn't like, or they just didn't think it was like or something. And but there are a lot of great wines made in Australia. It's just a question of navigating through like these high alcohol crazy wines.
Yeah. And I will say that
great wines, and they're made well, you know.
Yeah, and I will say that probably no place on earth. I mean, the Australians are savvy; they know what they're doing. They're hugely technically proficient, both in viticulture and winemaking. They have a big domestic market, and the best wines have a good export market too. I will say there's no other place on earth that can pivot as quickly as Australia when it comes to wine.
Right, they have like 4 harvests a year, right? I mean,
only in some of the worst places. But I will, like, when I haven't been there in a few years, but when I went last time, I don't even, that was must have been like 5 years ago at least. Every Chardonnay that I tasted was like a wannabe coterie. So it went from like big buttery oaky Chardonnay to like the extreme of the 180 degree. So, you know, like Australia is a hugely dynamic place for wine.
I think there's a lot of potential. I'm glad you picked it up,
Yeah.
because I mean, I think there is a huge amount of potential, and it's just a question for the right people to kind of start to guide everybody back to like, here are the wines that are being made in a natural, elegant way, and you know, and this is certainly one of them. I mean, it's
so delicious. This is just so drinkable.
Wine, right?
Yeah. So this is grown.
Are you drinking this, Lily, tonight? Are you having this?
I am. My standout tonight was the Tempranillo because I was just so surprised by it. But the Grenache is delicious.
And it said they're all about the same price point. They're all in that. How are the last 2 wines priced?
The Tempranillo is $29.99 and the Grenache is $54.99.
Okay, so right in that kind of.
I should say on the Grenache, because you mentioned Rayas, and this is, they have a great website. They call this project they call it An Approach to Relaxation.
Yeah.
The wine is Suzette, the winery is An Approach to Relaxation. The vineyard here is about 100 years.
Massage if you go to the winery, does that like?
No, this is I say winery, but there's no winery. It's made in a garage somewhere. Yeah, right. But the vineyard is planted somewhere, you know, I think 1880s, something like that. You know, old, gnarly looking bush vines planted in sandy soils, much like Rayas. So that's where that comes from. Old vines in these like super fine sandy soils, which I can't think of another wine. Like, we tend to think of sandy soils in the wine world as kind of not great, but Grenache seems to be the exception to that. That's where we look for these sandy soils, because it just brings this like red fruited, high toned, acidic freshness to these wines. And this is just a beautiful example of that.
Yep.
We
Great
got
wine.
a
Great wine.
question
Thank you
that
for
I
turning
think
this on. Go
for,
ahead.
for Arvid, given that he's an esteemed sommelier, what would your suggested food pairings be for this selection of wines? Kind of they're very different, each and every one of them. So if there was like a kind of a category of food or a dish that you could pair with each of them.
Sure. I think, let me just start from the beginning. Let's go back. So I think the Bodega Chakra Mainke, it is a really, even though it has like elegance and like it talked about the structure and acidity, it has some of those like more powerful aromatics. It is kind of a fruit forward. It's somewhere like in between your like classic, I don't even want to say it, but like New World Chardonnay and your sort of Burgundy and your Jean-Marc Rouleau Meursault, right? But I think this really deserves some power when it comes to food. So I would look at like, put some butter in it. Like this is lobster and butter, like sauce américaine. This is fried chicken. This is French fries. This is like something that has a little bit of that like roasted nutty tones to it. Or you just go super classic, go like fatty fish, go turbot with, shaved fennel, hazelnuts, nicely buttered mashed potatoes or something like that, like creamy.
The old world food profile, despite it being a new world wine. I think it's
Absolutely, yeah.
You're getting me hungry. Those are some good combinations there. You have access to the kitchen right now down there, Legacy?
It's so emptied out. I have been raiding it all day, but there's like we're down to dry goods. So I've had a lot of like almonds today. That's my diet. Almonds and beer.
What about some of these other wines? That was some great combinations.
Yeah, I mean the Harper Voigt Pinot. With Pinot, I shouldn't say that, but because this is quite structured. This has enough structure to tackle like kind of more powerful things. I would, if you think about the sort of where and when, this is my like on the grill wine. This is beef or lamb on the grill in summertime, like slightly chilled. Like we're only a couple of months away from that. It's just such a delicious, aromatic, exuberant wine, but it does have a structure to carry through and do that. I don't think it's like earthy and spicy enough to be the sort of game bird or that sort of thing. This is like an enjoyment, hedonistic wine. So like, yeah, when we're allowed to gather with our friends again, like go outside, put some steak on the grill, and drink a couple of bottles of Harper Voigt.
Hey, I just want to let everybody know it's okay to grill by yourself. Actually, I'm a big user of the grill. I like my grill, and I like grilling for myself and my immediate entourage that I have around me. So don't feel bad if you have to grill alone. It's okay to grill alone. Doesn't need to be an event to enjoy the grill.
Yeah, that's a good point. Next up, I think the Enfield is it's a really fruit forward. I'm not going to call it dark, but it really has, it doesn't have like the acidic bite of Tempranillo. Tempranillo is one of those misunderstood grapes where people tend to think of it as kind of like a dark fruit profile. Tempranillo in its essence is like red and acidic, right? If you taste like the great Riojas, they have like extreme acidity.
Yeah.
This is a different thing. This has a lower acidity for sure. It's still elegant and like very, very drinkable. I would
food might overwhelm this wine though more. You have to be more careful because I think of that elegance. You have to kind of like watch.
Yeah, this is definitely a wine that works with food, but I would tend to drink this with like softer things, if that makes sense. Like this is perfect with a big bowl of like pasta with like a tomato and like a lamb ragu, or you would put this. This is not wrong for the grill either, for that matter. But if you have like, this is maybe esoteric, but like sweet bread with a bunch of spices and herbs would work great with this.
Yeah, that would be. So we have a couple more questions before we open up. I'm going to call on a few of my friends out there that I see joining us and drinking that I know. If we see your video, we might call on you, and if we don't see you, we won't call on you. And it's a good thing that we don't have this pressure of 9 o'clock now to like end it, so we can go a little longer now, you know, keep things going. So the natural wine movement, and I don't want to influence the crowd, because like Noma, I've been in Noma, 5, 6, 7 times, something like that. And unbelievable restaurant, unbelievable experience. I haven't been to a new one since they reopened, although I was there when they did the Under the Bridge thing. Under the Bridge, I was there, Under the Bridge. And that's when they forced the natural wines on me.
A good reference.
They forced them on me, and we were able to sneak something in, but it was like, it was like a code. And it's a funny story about Noma, because like the Under the Bridge, it was a pop-up. It was like a thing. They weren't open, but they were open. They did this. They literally made a restaurant under a bridge in Copenhagen, and they served like 3 dishes, and we were like all getting into it, and they were like, oh, that's it. And then we were like, what do you mean that's it? We smelled like they were cooking beef on these like giant grills outside the pop-up. And we're like, what about the beef? Can we have the beef? Can we have the steak? And they're like, oh, no, we're experimenting or whatever. I was like, they were like torturing us with like cooking the beef, and we couldn't eat it. And they served us the natural wines, and but I'm going to let you speak about natural wines before I.
Yeah, sure. So I should say first that I never worked at Noma. I almost did on 3 occasions. I almost took the job there, but ended up not. Partly because I didn't really agree with the wine philosophy. I enjoyed.
I hear they make you work for food. Is that true?
They're any job at that level is grueling. I will say this. I think Noma, I've eaten at a lot of like the 3-star restaurants or whatever, like that level of restaurant. I think Noma is maybe in my mind the greatest restaurant in the world. I really do. It is a different level when it comes to, it might not be the most delicious restaurant. I'll say that. And I think they know that. But it's not meant to be. It is truthfully meant to be intellectually challenging, and they have a philosophy, and they work within the confines of the box that they've sort of set for themselves, and that's what makes it really interesting. I think they follow through with that sort of philosophy on the wine world, and do ultimately only natural wines. I've had some amazing experiences with their food and wine pairings with only natural wine. Do you like natural wines? Like, honestly, you're like okay with it? I like natural wine when natural wine is good and delicious. It's that simple. I at the time while I was in Copenhagen, I wrote this.
You don't sound too confident.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. So I wrote this very controversial blog post, article, whatever, back when I was in like 2012, 2013, about this very subject. And it became viral in the wine world, at least, and I got a lot of flack for it and praise. But what was happening in Copenhagen at the time within the natural wine world, and has sort of gone on since then, is that unfortunately, since Noma is so great of a restaurant, they attracted all the talent. So if you were a great young chef or a great young person wanting to go into service and into wine, you wanted to go through Noma or one of those like related restaurants, right? Yeah. So if you were a like aspiring sommelier, there was no better thing to put on your CV than having, Noma for 2 years or whatever. But unfortunately, that meant that as a sommelier, You never tasted Bordeaux. You never tasted like clean champagne. You never tasted whatever, like all the like the things that we recognize as like the great wines of the world. You wouldn't taste DRC or all of these like iconic wines, right? And my point of view at the time, at least, and I think it still is that like as dangerous as it is to say that I don't like South African wine or that I don't like Grenache, it's the same thing to say that I don't like Bordeaux or like there'll never be a great wine made in Napa Valley or with, you know, that's the kind of thing you'd hear out of like the Noma wine crowd. And I think that was wrong then and is wrong now. I think the best natural wines are great. They're delicious. The best natural wines are the wines that don't have to use the label natural wines to be or to like to sell themselves. You know, all in all, I think we should. So my critique of the movement is that it tends to like capture people and like lock them into a dogmatic thinking, right? That nothing outside of this bubble is worth paying attention to, and that's not true. I think we can all be really thankful for the natural wine movement because it's challenged everyone, including all of the like conventional winemakers in places like Bordeaux and Napa Valley and Champagne, to like question what they were doing in the vineyards and in the winery and like strive for something better. You know, without the natural wine movement, we wouldn't have like, I don't know, how many Bordeaux properties are biodynamic at this point? Like of the good ones, like
I think that's
20?
For Lily, not me, actually.
Yeah, like a lot of them, right? And like,
yeah, no, the biodynamic's different though, but natural wine is like different.
right, but I think it's connected and I think the natural wine movement and like the related parts of that like drove that movement forward, and we should all be like thankful for the fact that it happened and is still strong. It's made the whole world of wine a lot better. Whether you like the label or the wines or not, it doesn't really matter.
Right. So we should bring on a few people, a few of our guests. We have to do that a little earlier. You know, next time. You've been full of so information. I'm going to bring my friend from Oregon on because he's Mr. Oben, William Oben. Can you get him on here? I have to say hi. Hi, William. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, brother. How are you?
I am great. Good to see you. It looks beautiful out there in Oregon right now.
It's like summer. It's gorgeous.
Nice. Are you drinking some Harper Voigt Pinot Noir? What are you drinking?
Not today. I just, Mondays is for Morgan.
Mondays.
Nice.
2010 Lapierre Morgan. It's delicious. Easy. Talking about the whole movement, huh?
The natural wine movement. What are you saying? If they only knew. I want to talk to you about Oregon because you live in Oregon. You know Oregon wines better than most people because you're there and you're going to the vineyards and you're living it out there. And what are some of your favorites out there right now?
It's kind of you got to split them. You got to split them between the classics and the new kids, right? Classically, I think people like Cameron, and Irie, Thomas, kind of little kind of weirder wines that have been around for a long time. And then on the new kids side, Walter Scott, those guys are doing a great job. I really do like the Harper Voigt wines. There's a couple of other producers out here that make a similar style of wine. People like Swick. There's a few, but there's a lot of great stuff happening out here. Raj is killing it with Evening Land and the Chardonnay program. There's just little tiny producer called 00 that's I don't know if anybody out there has had it, but it's going to start turning some heads around pretty quickly when it kind of gets out there. They make a little Pinot, but it's mostly a Chardonnay project. Some cool stuff out here.
I think you just rattled off 10 great recommendations for
Yeah.
those of us that
Yeah,
have
you
a
know.
pen and a pad. That was, very, very helpful.
Well, Oregon is a special place, and the things that are happening out here, and people have finally, I think, I moved to Oregon in 2003, and I wasn't pleased. As you know, I came from drinking a lot of really good shit, and then all of a sudden in 2003, the hottest recorded vintage in Oregon, they put me out here to drink Pinot, and I don't like 15% alcohol Pinot,
Yeah.
and that's what people were drinking here back in the day.
Well, thank you. I appreciate, and William drinks a lot of Burgundy. He's a very knowledgeable drinker out there in Oregon. Thank you for sharing a little bit about that, and appreciate that. And we have some. Why don't we bring some of the people who have some questions or comments to ask them in person, or do we have Lily? Who do you want to bring on now?
I think we may have lost some of them, but I'd love to just get their questions out there.
Okay.
For Arvid, is there any can you single out a single region from the New World that has captured your attention in terms of rise in grape growing, winemaking, and quality?
It's hard because there's stuff happening just about everywhere. Like I am, in terms of my own personal proclivities, I mentioned Santa Barbara earlier. I think that's where, when I go to California right now, I tend to think that a lot of, it's not the prettiest or like the nicest wineries by far, but I think some of the greatest wines are coming out of there. On the other hand, I think Oregon, like William mentioned earlier, has made some enormous strides. I think Oregon suffered for way too long, for good and bad, like where the California guys had all the money and all the investments and all the, the winemaking chops, or if they didn't have it, they'd hire someone who did. Oregon was just all family wineries. And that was good and bad, because what I saw when I first went to Oregon was that everyone was making, 6 different Pinots and 3 different Rieslings. So, one off dry and one dry and one this and one that, and like a Sauvignon Blanc and a Pinot Gris, and everyone was making Pinot Gris. Now I think people have gained the sort of confidence to say that, hey, I want to make this, and like we make Pinot, and that's what we make. Or like people like Roche that mentioned who were basically saying that Pinot isn't even good, and I'm going to go Gamay and Chardonnay, and that's what's great. And like same for Walter Scott, their Chardonnays are like world class, like amazing Chardonnay. So I think Oregon really deserves a mention. Australia, we've talked a bit about. I think it's just so exciting, but unfortunately for I think most of us in the chat here, it's far away, and it sort of goes with the ebbs and flows of like currency and that kind of thing, if it's good value or not. But it's amazing. South Africa is insane in terms of diversity, and just I think for me, the kinds of wines, the Chenin Blancs and the blends with Semillon and a bunch of red varietals, Carignan, Mourvedre, and Grenache, and so forth. Incredible wines. Really, really world-class, old vineyards for the most part. Really, really cool stuff. And then we have South America. Like I can't single anything out. Like I think Argentina for now has the upper hand in terms of winemaking chops. Like we talked about earlier, they know how to make good wine. But I really think that in the long term, Chile might be the more interesting place.
That's a controversial statement right there.
Any winemaker producers in particular in Chile?
There's good stuff on the market right now. There's the stuff from the De Martino family, the famous geologist Pedro Parra has some wine specifically made with Sanso, old vineyards. Like, John, when was the last time you tasted Sanso when it wasn't blended into Tempier?
You know, I don't know if I've ever had a Sanso.
Yeah, like it's not. You know, if you read the books, it's not. It's meant to be like a blending grape in the south of France, right, or north of Africa. It's not supposed to be great, but when you taste these wines, they're so good. So like some of the old vineyard Carignan and Sanso and stuff that is in Chile is fantastic. And, you know, there's people in Argentina too that are doing the same kind of journey. The guys from Storsal and the Michelini brothers, that kind of thing. Yeah, there's cool stuff everywhere, and you know that's where the New World has the upper hand, right? It's like you can do what you want. There's kind of a pioneering spirit, right? Like if you're Jean-Marc Rouleau in Meursault and you're like, hey, I want to see I want to grow some Carignan. Like there's all kinds of stuff that comes. First off, you couldn't do it where you are, and there'd be all kinds of like reputations and, you know, your like reputations on the line for that. But if you're in the New World, you can kind of do what you want. There's still some of that in there, and that's great.
Entrepreneurial creative spirit is kind
Yeah,
of
I think that's worth something,
right? Speaking of that, I want to bring my good friend Jeremy online. Jeremy, you want to join us? He's been following us since the beginning here.
Here you go, Jeremy.
It's great to be here. I want to thank John,
wow.
and Arvid. It's great to see you guys on behalf of me and the Hoff. Delighted to be here.
It's a scary background.
Yeah. I love your background.
Thank you.
What are you drinking tonight?
I'm actually drinking a wine that I bought at the online auction, Acker's online auction, about 2 weeks ago. It's a 95, not a natural wine, a 95 Mondavi cab.
Okay.
Okay.
And, it's you know, it's sort of a New World wine. Tried to keep on theme this time, and it's you know, not a particularly notable vintage, but it's a nice wine. Got a mix. I was trying to sort out like, you know, blue, black, red fruits, but it's got just a panoply of fruits. A lot of, you know, kind of foresty, cedar, pine, you know, flavors to it, and just a great wine. I think it's trading on your online auctions for about $80 a bottle, and terrific value as far as I'm concerned, and really enjoying it. So
we have a couple of great Cabernet sessions coming up. We got Carlton McCoy from Heights coming up in, I think, a couple of weeks, right? When is that date, Lily? We have Tuesday?
Next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday. What is today?
Today is Monday.
Monday, a week, 9 days from now. Thank you for
a blur.
Love Carlton. He's a great guy. Obviously, super knowledgeable somm previously at the Little Nell, and now running Heights. A great guy.
Yep.
Great wine personality.
Yep. So
Great.
it's going to see you next Wednesday, and we're going to see. We have Paul Roberts from Colgan coming in May for Napa Valley, and he's going to bring us some great stuff as well. And thank you, Jeremy, for joining us. Appreciate it. Great to see you as always. And who else? I see we have my good friend Jonathan. I have to call him out. He's always good for a comment or two. Jonathan, how are you doing today?
Doing very well.
Are you drinking some New World wine? I
am actually. I'm on point today. So
what are you
I'm
drinking?
Progeny Trinity Blanc, which is made by our friend of both of ours, Paul Wools, and it's grown on Mount Veeder, but it's actually a blend of Roussanne, Mourvedre, and Voigt. So, you know, think of a white Chave, but it is a better version, if I can say that. A great mint and great caffeine on it. But It has great acidity, and I've brought it out to a lot of wine dinners, and it has just shocked the hell out of people. So it's
Roger.
made by, Paul and Betty O'Shaughnessy. Betty owns O'Shaughnessy Winery. Paul owns Progeny. So it's hard to believe that this is actually a real New World wine using Old World grapes. But it's just a killer wine at $75 a bottle. It's a mailing list wine, but I think the mailing list is still open. But it's a beautiful wine.
Nice, nice. Save me a bottle of that. I need to, or maybe I'll call Paul. That's
You might have to call Paul. I only get 6 a year, so it's tough.
yeah, you can't. Yeah, well, I see how you're cooking, and you have a same kind of thing. That's I mean, when you're at home, you need to cook and you need to drink good wine, and I see that you're doing both, and that's something I need to. It's good to pick up something and learn something new from our friends, and that's kind of
You got to get out of your bedroom if you're going to cook.
I do. I make it to the kitchen. I'm calling right here, and then I come right back here. It's kind of it. But I mean, that's the perfect theme. Like the New World wines. These are 4 fantastic wines that I'm like super happy to be like great wines that everybody can drink at home. And I'd like to thank Arvid. We've kind of had a very long session here, and great to have you. Great, thank you for introducing us to these wines, and look forward to seeing everybody again soon. We'll be back Wednesday night. It's just going to be Lily and I back on. It's going to be date night with Lily and I, just Lily and I on Wednesday. We're going to handle it, and we're going to do some Northern Rhone, Syrah, some wines from Chaves, Clap, Forey, and somebody else I forget.
Lindsay Perry.
Right.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
See you Wednesday.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Good night. See you on Wednesday.
Cheers.